Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Nolan Financial Radio. My name is Tara Nolan from Nolan Financial. And if you're just new to the show, I'll just say, if you have a question as we go through the show, because we're talking about inflation today, you can always give Chris and I a call at 719-210-4242. And definitely you want to visit us online at www.taraenolan.com. While you're there, you can check out what we look like and the different services that we offer and sign up for our newsletter and keep track of the show. So it's a great place to get informed. And while you're there, you also want to click on the radio page, because while you're there, you can actually check out our past shows. We do lots of educational topics. We talk about everything from insurance to IRAs to vacation homes and all kinds of things money related. And you can subscribe to the program on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. So again, please don't hesitate to reach out to Chris and I if you have a question. We like to help people plan for their dreams, because it all starts right here with asking great questions. So, we're getting to today's topic. I was just recently sitting in my office meeting with a client, and we are starting to get back to the office. We do a lot of virtual, but we are doing some meetings at the office as well. And, I kind of leaned back in my office and was enjoying the sunny view. We're getting to that time of year where it's pretty again. And I was feeling really good about things. I like to feel good about things. It's more fun that way. And then I was checking out the news on the computer. And, the first topic I saw was inflation. And it's just talk about putting a little bummer on your day, inflation, because it's one of those sneaky things in our retirement planning that we can't control, but we kind of know it's there, but we hope it wasn't there. So if you're listening in today, we're really going to take a deep dive into inflation, because you plan for having your money, but then there's just these little things that are insidious that kind of erode away the value of your money in the future. So you need to really understand that. But before we get into that, Tony, how are you doing today?
I'm here. I'm excited. In fact, I should have my own little, I don't know, when you introduce me, maybe this should be my intro song.
Perfect. I feel like you need a magic wand, though.
Yeah, it's the magic. It's the magic that I bring to the show. Just kidding. But, it's funny, your theme song today, I don't know if you've changed it, but boy, I was really rocking out to your theme today. I was really, I was kind of rocking out. I love that. So that got me going. I'm excited. And then the topic you brought up, Tara, it's funny. I knew this was coming, because for the last few weeks, that's all I've been hearing about, right? Is how expensive things are. I've personally noticed it. We're going to talk about some of that. And I know you've been hearing from people you meet with and talk to. I've been hearing from friends and relatives and neighbors about the costs of everything, housing, lumber, everything. We're going to get into that. Supply and demand, cars. There's a lot to talk about today. So we'll get into it soon. But first, I have been great. How are you and Chris doing? I know you guys have been busy taking care of clients, and between your military career and your financial career, I know you're working on a book, and you still have horses to take care of on top of all this, right? We're not forgetting about the horses, right? They're getting the attention they need.
If I'm being honest, the horses are getting a little bit of downtime.
But yes.
But I can share a funny story with you. So in the summertime now, there's grass, and we let them out in the front yard.
Yeah.
And we just did some remodeling last year. So we have our bedroom, so it looks right out over the yard, of course. And we opened the window last night because it was getting hot in the house. I woke up this morning, and the horses were all sleeping right outside of our window.
Oh, that's great. They want to be close to you.
Seriously? We got a picture. It was really cool that they had 20 acres to hang out on, but they came and they were sleeping right there next to us.
That's right, because they're starved for attention, right?
Right.
They want attention. It's just like having that family dog. He wants to be near you. We have our dog, which is about the size of a small horse. We thought he was going to be much smaller. He was a rescue. We got him as a rescue, and he wasn't even 1 year old yet. Well, he was about 6 months. Well, he grew. So we have a big dog that runs around, but he's a lover, and he's so attached to us. And, we've been home for the last year.
Oh,
So
yeah, yeah.
he's become attached. Now, if we leave, he gets very sad and lays by the door. And when we're
Oh,
home, he doesn't leave our side, right? So,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's cute. But with a horse, that's even better. You'd think, oh, they're standoffish. They're going to go do their own things, but there they are laying outside your window. I love it. That's
So,
awesome.
yeah.
So
But
let's talk about inflation. I mean, I've seen a lot of stories about inflation lately, and I think that there are a few things that can cause the kind of anxiety over finances, like inflation, especially people who are in or near retirement or nearing retirement, because the last thing you want is an increased, rising prices on things, right?
Well, and that's absolutely, Tony. And it's the question, is why are fears getting higher, or about fears about inflation getting higher happening? And it's because, when you start to see things like the price of gas, the price of cars, or
Yeah.
it's just like basics like toilet paper or peanut butter and soda. Those are the things
Three
that,
of my favorite things.
right. But that's the stuff because you kind of figure out what your budget is and whatever it is, say you spend $1,000 a month on basics. And then all of a sudden those prices start going up, then you just have to keep adjusting. And it's kind of like, I think all of us have a little secret planner inside and we want to know like how much things are going to cost. We're not worried about the fun things, but like all the basics, we just kind of want to have a baseline for what that's going to be. And inflation is one of those scary things, right? Because we don't control it.
That's true.
And what I find, Tony, is a lot of my clients, what we really like doing is when we put together a plan, is we like taking as much of the uncertainty out of the world as possible. I can't take all of it out because I don't have a crystal ball, but the more we can really project and plan and put stability out there in someone's life, that's what it's about. And inflation is one of those things so we have to plan for it, right? Because you have to have a little bit of that fudge factor to go, well, here's what we think it's going to be, but let's make sure we've accounted so that we have enough, right? Because that's the thing is we don't want to end up where we don't have enough.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that. So now what are some of the issues out there currently driving all these concerns about inflation?
Yeah, and let's get into that, Tony, because I think something that can really help allay fears is just to have some understanding of at least what's driving it. That makes it a little less scary. And so one of the big reasons that we're seeing some rises in March has just been, during the pandemic, prices all took a big dip, right? Because we were all staying home and we weren't going out and doing things. So now prices are starting to rise a little bit as we're starting to get back to normal life. And so it's going to feel like a big jump because we've all been living a very much a smaller, more controlled life. And now we're getting back out there. And then just globally, right? Because we're so interconnected around the world. There's just been shortages of raw materials, and that's driving up costs. And it's hard to believe, like the raw lumber from somewhere around the world can start affecting prices here. But the home builders are scrambling, right? Because actually a lot of people are trying to build and buy houses, so it's a good thing on that side. But then all these raw materials are starting to come up short. And then there's just little things you don't think about, like copper or other little commodities, things that make chips for the computers. And so the big one right now is for auto manufacturers is that need for semiconductors.
Yeah, the chips in cars. Tara, I saw a video. It was last week on, I think it was CBS News, one of their morning news shows on the weekend or something. But they showed acres of brand new cars just sitting in this acres of brand new cars. I think they happened to show a GM plant, but it was all these plants, auto manufacturers with all these cars that they can't ship to dealerships because they don't have the chips that control the car's computer chips. And so there's a shortage on semiconductors or computer chips. And so there's a car shortage, right? Because there's $6 trillion in stimulus that has been unleashed. The government's been printing money and all that stimulus money is in the economy. So the demand is there, but the supply can't meet it. And so that's driving up prices, right? I mean, like you mentioned, I mean, I saw a thing on the news, there's parts of the country where there's not enough chicken, right? So people who like chicken wings, there's a shortage on chicken wings for restaurants. I mean, it's just crazy. That's goofy. I mean, autos, houses, Lumber is crazy, and we can get into that. But lumber has gone up 300% in some parts of the country. 300% price increase.
And I can tell you, as a loggy in the military, the supply chain I deal with supply chains a lot, but for the average person, you don't realize how many steps are involved to get things into your world. And it's really disruptive. Like when way down on the supply chain, something that you didn't even know happened impacts your life. And so that's sort of what we're starting to see. But here's what we want to know today. I'm sure everyone listening, Tony, is, so what does that mean to me?
Yes. Great. What does that mean to
me? Big problems in the world.
The average person's paycheck. What does that mean? How's that going to affect me?
So the thing is paychecks are starting to nudge up a little bit overall. So actually the average hourly earnings is up 0.7%, which is actually a pretty healthy jump for a single month. Yeah, and additionally, like with raw materials, companies are having a hard time finding workers. And so, the economy added about 266,000 jobs in April. So that's a lot fewer than was expected. So that potentially could mean good jobs for the paycheck, right? So if you're able to get out into the workforce and get involved, then, that's always a good thing when you're trying to earn that paycheck.
Yeah. Well, and I saw that the Federal Reserve, Tara, had weighed in on this. What did they have to say?
Well, and this is always interesting because it is, we have our money situation, but it's always amazing how policy really impacts how that happens.
Yeah, it does.
And, the Fed's job is supposed to be able to shield and protect Americans as much as possible from inflation. And so for his part, Jerome Powell, the Fed's current chair, he expects inflation to level off as the supply issues are solved, right? So we're kind of having this burble. And so as it starts to level off, the inflation should start to level off. But you should also note that the Fed experts have emphasized that the one-time or short-term increases that are ongoing, and these come with the constant price jumps. So I think it's going to take a while from the pandemic for things to level out and smooth out and the economy to kind of get sorted again. So I think we're going to have a little inflation for a little bit, but I don't think it's going to go out of control.
No, and that makes sense to me. I mean, I hope it means that our inflation worries go away sooner rather than later, right?
Right. And then so this is why it's really important it's not really important what I think, but what's important is, the Fed is promoting two reasons that it thinks the current price increases are likely to be more of a blip and not like a trend. And so the first reason, Tony, is that the average American still expects inflation to remain under control just because of recent economic history. So we've had these little periods, and so nothing has happened that we can't withstand. And the Fed very closely tracks inflation expectations, and there's a measure of where consumers and markets expect inflation to be heading. And so, Tony, for the past 2 decades, there has been actually very little change in inflation expectations. So, simply put, if the public thinks inflation is going to continue hanging around 2%, which it has been, businesses and consumers are likely to adjust how they're behaving, even if the commodity prices surge. So what this means, Tony, is businesses likely won't charge their customers higher prices, even when they expect those surges, because they expect them to be temporary. And then workers are likely not to demand big, huge wage hikes to counteract the higher prices. So it's really interesting that the prices can go up, but it's how we respond as a group. And just like the recent things like the supply line and the way we all will rush to go buy things, or if you've ever lived somewhere where there's hurricanes, and when a hurricane's coming, like toilet paper and bottled water are sold out. Yeah. So if we look at those things as blips and then it steadies out, that's where we want to try to keep inflation. Hopefully is going to be where it stays.
Yeah. And that, Tara, that strikes me as a reason that we could all be optimistic based on what the Fed's saying there. What was the second reason that the Fed gave for thinking that these current price increases are only temporary?
Well, and the current thinking also is just because for the last 25 years, it has been fairly under control. And so even when employment was at a staggeringly low rate of 3.5% in 2019 and forced higher salaries, consumer prices still stayed under the Fed's about 2% target. So right now the Fed is saying, let's not panic yet, because this has been going on, these ups and downs for the past 25 years. And we've maintained a stasis. And so right now the Fed has been able to do the job of protecting the American people.
Yeah. And I think this has been a great show so far today. We should probably take a quick break. But before we do you have anything to add for the listeners?
Well, I definitely want to. This topic is so important, Tony. And when I deal with my clients, the biggest thing that they always say that makes them feel better is when they feel like they're more in control and they know like how much is enough and am I on track to get there? And that's really what we're talking about today, Tony, with inflation is we're planning today for retirement in the future. And am I going to have enough? And so I would encourage Chris and I have set aside 20 complimentary calls or appointments for the first 20 callers from today's show. And Tony, that is a complimentary call to sit down for those people that want to go, here's my plan. Here's how much I think I need. Is this going to be enough? Because I mean, that's what we all want to know with our retirement planning, right? Is
right.
Am I going to have enough?
Right.
And this is a question that Chris and I really like to sit down and help people understand. And because we don't have to guess, we can help you figure that out.
Yeah. So what's that phone number our listeners can call to set up that meeting? And there's no cost for that meeting. You don't charge for that initial consultation. And I just think, Tara, with the inflation rising the way it is, people worried about how that's going to affect the markets, the government printing a lot of money. We know that taxes are going to go up. So what can we do to hedge against all these things and make sure that we have a solid plan in place? How can they call you to set up that consultation?
Sure, Tony. That number is 719-210-4242. That's 719-210-4242. Yeah, Tony, just give Chris and I a call and set up that complimentary appointment because nothing feels better than when you have a plan. It really does.
All right. All right. Well, and I want to remind our listeners, you are listening to Nolan Financial Radio, and I am your co-host, Tony Shore. I'm here with our host, Tara Nolan. And Tara, before we jump back into our topic today, which is talking about how to get ready for inflation. And I think that's why you're giving out the phone number, because the way to deal with inflation and make sure that you're protecting your retirement savings from inflation and higher taxes is to have a strategy to minimize that tax burden, to deal with inflation. And it's so helpful. It can make or break your retirement. So I encourage our listeners to set up that consultation. Now, another way something you're working on to help our listeners with all this is you're writing a book. And I know it's going to be great. You've told me about it. Where are you at on the book? I didn't ask you at the beginning of the show.
So I'm in the deep editing process right now, Tony, going through developmental editing. I think we're actually going to create a different title because we've been just doing a lot of little market researching and looking at the titles. And I think we're going to be shifting from wealth as a team sport to money moves, changing where your money lives, changes how your money grows.
Yep.
And because that kind of gets to the heart of what we're talking about. But yeah, we're going through the developmental edits, and it's such a process because I have it in my brain and I have to figure out how to communicate it out.
Right. That's the tough part of writing. And I admire you because, I know that writing a book that's a lot of work. I've never written a book, and that's why, because it is so much work. Not that I haven't. I've tried to come up with plot ideas and ideas for books, and I've started writing a few. And I'm a writer. That's where I excelled in school, creative writing. I was the editor of my school newspaper, worked on my college paper. So I love that aspect, but I admire anyone who actually does it, because it's one thing to say, oh, I like to write, or I want to write a book someday, or I'm trying to write a book, and actually doing it. So I admire you for that. Now, let's keep going with our talk on whether or not we're ready for inflation. Where do you want to go next? Where do you want to start on this segment?
Well, I want to talk about some different solutions that have been offered to how to protect yourself against inflation. And this next one, it's talking about substitution. And I just have to share, this is a story that I just lived last year. So it came time, I needed a new car because I'm one of those people that I buy a car, Tony, and I drive it until it dies.
Yep.
And
Same.
I've always had like this secret desire. I always liked the Jag, and I can't tell you why. Like I must have watched a movie like way back when I was a kid.
My wife wants a Jaguar, and I'm like, honey, we can't afford that.
Well, but we went, and I was like, I don't want to live my life like I can't afford that. So I was like, if I want one, I'm going to. But so we went. We test drove a Jag.
Wow.
We test drove the Porsches. We test drove the Volvos. We went through like every car with a badge, and I really, we tried them all out. But then I went back, and I had a few years back just a Murano, and I loved that. And it was, we spent the whole summer. I drove it. I went back. But the thing is like the Jag is built on a truck frame, so it's really not that comfortable. And then I went to the Volvo and back to that Murano, and the human factors, like just the way the buttons are and how easy the computer interface was. I was like, okay, taking the badge aside, which car is actually the most comfortable? And
Right.
it was a process for me because I'm not really a car person, but it was powerful, like that badge. I want that Jag.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day,
Jaguars look great, and they have the
Oh.
Jaguar name. And so that's what you're buying, the appearance and the look. But which one do you actually functions better and you like personally for you driving? That's the key. You're right.
And for me, once I took my ego out of it, and then I'm not a big car person anyway, and my money always goes to the horses. We ended up with the
Sure.
Murano, Tony, and it was like it was less than half the price. And so I can tell you what is now my budget's very happy, because now all this money
Yes.
that I would have been spending, especially during the pandemic, for a car that just sat in the garage.
Oh,
that
yeah,
would have been
no.
a lot of money, where instead of that money going there,
You dodged a bullet right there.
well, I can take that money and invest it and do other things with it. And so my planner side of me goes, that's a lot of money that would have just been sitting in my garage, not even driving.
Sure.
And going out. So one of the first things you can do with inflation is just start to go, buy things intentionally. Like if a car is your thing, so like for Chris really wanted a Tesla. And Tony, he got it, and he loves that car. He drives it. It's really fun now, because
That's what I want too. I want a full electric car.
And I'm irritated now because now I have a chore of stopping for gas, and he doesn't have to do that. He just comes home and plugs in. But so we splurged on the Tesla because that was like, we thought about it, and that's what he really wanted. For me, I'm like, okay, the badge is nice, but do I really? It's not that much of a thing. So, and then I was able to put my money somewhere else. So one of the things looking at inflation to protect yourself is just be intentional. I mean, I'm not saying live in austerity, but just make intentional choices and go, if you really, really want it, get it. But if you don't, make a different choice.
Sometimes a really nice Camry, Toyota Camry might suit you just as well as a Mercedes or a Land Rover. Maybe that Chevy Traverse works as well as the Land Rover does for you, and you can cut your cost in half. And so sometimes it's just status, and hey, it depends on your situation. We're not saying you can't have nice things, but there's nothing wrong with a Toyota Camry either, or a slightly used vehicle with just really low mileage. I mean, you're saving thousands right there instantly.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, you want to be smart about it, especially when you see inflation going up. And I mean, auto, we already talked about the shortage in new cars, which has actually driven up demand for used cars. And it's harder to find good low mileage used cars right now. So there is a supply and demand issue. And again, that's raising prices on used cars right now as well. So if you can get by, maybe now is not the best time. But so if inflation is hitting the auto industry, Tara, like we're talking about, I really do think that, watching it like you talked about, getting the Milano instead of the Jaguar, it seems like the smart play.
Well, it worked for me, and then it's freed up my budget because I am looking for a new horse.
Sure. Oh, wow. Okay. Now, are you replacing a horse or just adding another horse?
Donzer's getting a lot of arthritis, and so I don't know that we're going to be able to do any more competition. So I'm still learning quite a bit with him, but it's kind of that time. So we're looking. But so the same thing carries over, right? Not just for cars, Tony. So the same idea can go with a lot of different things. Like, I mean, these are basics, like the grocery store. There's always like the brand name and then the thing that's exactly the same.
Sure.
And I think we've talked about it before, like the pink tax that's out there, like for women's razors, where you'll get one that's pink and it's more expensive, and it's the exact same razor as the one for men. It's just pink. So you can be on the lookout.
My wife noticed that too. So yeah.
That, and then like over-the-counter medications, you're going to get the brand name cough syrup or the other cough syrup. So it's just kind of like being more cognizant and just kind of creating that mindset.
Right. Yeah, I think
And
that's good. I think that's good. And coming up with obviously people have anxiety about things like inflation and market fluctuation in the economy. And so coming up with a strategy to fight it, and that's what you're talking about, is a terrific reason, again, to meet with your financial services professional like you and Chris to talk about it and get that strategy in place, right?
we do. And it's like one of the biggest things that we always try to sit down with people and look at it is to say, how do we take what you're doing and get as much of it as possible into a tax-free situation? Because that's one of the
Sure.
biggest things. And yeah, and it's just looking at that big picture of how you're investing and then making sure that you're planning for enough. Because like one of the big myths out there, Tony, is people go, well, when I retire, I'm only going to need like 75% of my income to
Right.
retire in. And these are myths because we're living longer. And when we retire, we're doing stuff. And so,
yeah, especially when you first retire, those go-go years, when you're still going in the go mode, that's when you spend more money. And nobody wants to take a pay. I love this. You can live on 60% of what you made in retirement. Well, maybe, but who wants to take a pay cut in retirement? And how many people are going to be able to do that, really?
yeah, and I love this. I was doing an interview yesterday, Tony, with one of my great financial coaches. And the question I love that he asks people is, if you won the lottery, what would you do? And his whole point of that question is to get people to start dreaming again and going, when I'm retired, I want to live. I don't want to just exist.
Exactly. Yep.
And then my job is to sit down and help people go, okay, well, so how do we make sure we have enough that we can live? And that's what this is really about, is I don't want people to be afraid of inflation. Let's plan for it. We know it's going to happen. So let's make sure we've accounted for it and taken measures to account for it. That's what it's all about.
And so many people end up in say long-term care or such when they get older, but they don't. So that's what a lot of people think about as retirement is, they think about their 85 to 90-year-old grandparent or parent that they know. And they're basically homebound or in assisted living, but really initial retirement, those are your no-go years. We're talking about your go-go years. And so you need to plan for those financially so you can have the go-go years. So there's 3 stages, right? There's you've said it before, there's the go-go, there's the slow go, and then there's the no-go. Those are the 3 stages of retirement. And so you need money for those go-go years. I mean, you'll have plenty of time to just what you say, just exist. You don't want to just exist during your go-go years. You want to be able to have the freedom and the money to do things and to travel, to golf, to do whatever, whatever you want to do, show your horses, right?
Well, and you've brought it up, Tony. You just made me think of a visual, just like the bell curve. And so for a lot of planning, a lot of people focus on that accumulation phase, right? As you're working towards retirement.
Yep.
And so a lot of people, and that's what all the media tells you, is you got to focus on investing and growing and getting rate of return. And that's good. That's part. But then the next phase is then how do you spend that nest egg when you're in retirement? And that's quite a significant, for most people, that's at least 20 years. So we want to plan for that. And then the very final thing that we look at is that transfer of wealth when you're going to pass. And so a complete financial picture, Tony, it's got to be all 3 of those things, because if you're only focusing on growing and you don't know how you're going to spend it, how do you know if you have enough? And that's the questions that we want to answer is, how do you know if you have enough, and how do you know if you're on track to get there? So those are the things that we have to
by
look
working with a financial services professional. That's how you figure that out. Right. And you have to do the math. Now, we're out of time for today's show. It flew by, Tara. But before we go, I know that the way people need to deal with this problem of inflation, all of the economic issues coming our way, the proposed tax increases, they need a set plan and strategy in place for retirement. How can they get a hold of you to set that up?
Sure, Tony. The best way is to give Chris and I a call at 719-210-4242. You can also contact us through the website, www.taraenolan.com. But Tony, the best way is to call today and take advantage of our complimentary call. It's 719-210-4242. We can sit down and start to look and go, are you on track? And do you know what your number is? And are you going to have enough? That's what we want to help people do.
All right. Thanks, Tara. And that does it for today's episode of Nolan Financial Radio with our host, Tara Nolan.
Join us soon for another episode of Nolan Financial Radio. Take care, and we'll talk with you next time.